Hey, it's Dave Brown here, host of Now with Dave Brown on AMI. Check out this latest highlight from the show. A new report finds that nearly half the insolvencies filed in Ontario last year were by millennials. Here to elaborate on the 2022 Joe Detter study is Douglas Hoyes. Douglas is a licensed insolvency trustee and the co-founder of Hoyes, Michaelis and Associates, who released the study. Hey, Douglas, thank you for making time to be with us this morning. I'm grateful.
Thanks, Dave. Happy to be here.
So before we dive into some of the specific findings, what is the overall purpose behind the Joe Detter study?
Well, as you said, we're a personal insolvency firm. We help people who have more debt than they can handle. I like to know what's going on out there. So that's one of the reasons we do it. The other reason is to show people that they aren't alone. There are a lot of people throughout Canada who get into financial trouble. And so we want to show what's going on so that people realize, hey, there's other people in my situation as well.
What methodology are you using to comb through the data?
So we take a look at every single client that we deal with. So it's not a survey, it's a study. We're looking at everybody, and then we aggregate all the data. So we add up how many people are this age and at this level of debt and so on to come up with the profile of the typical client that we deal with. And that's why we call it the Joe Detter study. Obviously, we also talk about Jane Detter, and we show the differences between the two. But that's just the name we came up over a decade ago, and we've been doing this study every year since.
One of the really jarring findings is that finding about millennials. In fact, as soon as the report was released, I talked about it a little bit on the air, and I said, we need to dive a little bit deeper. So in terms of those insolvencies filed by millennials, how does that fit into the broader context of the data that you were combing through?
Well, you would think that millennials, who make up just over a quarter of the adult population, would be about a quarter of the insolvencies. That would kind of make sense, right? You would think that insolvencies happen at all ages of life. And in fact, that's not the case. Almost half of our clients are millennials. So that's like twice as much as what you'd expect based on what the population is. So they are 1.7 times more likely than a baby boomer to become insolvent, 1.4 times more likely than a Gen Xer. So it's that's the most jarring thing, that people at that stage in life are getting into debt problems a lot more than every other age group.
And the way that people have to think about millennials is a little different than perhaps they thought about it 10 years ago. We're now talking about people who are, say, 40 years old, right? I'm turning 40 this year, and I'm an older millennial. So we're not talking about someone who's maybe just fresh out of college and dealing with debt. We're talking about people who should be well established into their careers. So what are some of the underlying factors that's causing these insolvencies amongst millennials?
Yeah, you're exactly right. We use the definition of people who are aged 26 to 41. So you're right. A 40-year-old person is now, by this definition, a millennial. And I think the thing that starts off the problems for millennials is student loans, which is, I'm older than you, Dave, by a couple of decades. And when I went to school back in the 1980s, I was able to get a summer job at minimum wage and still earn enough to pay for tuition. I could work during the school year, pay for most of my supplies. My parents helped me with living expenses. I was able to go to school with no student loan debt. Now, of course, back then, tuition at the university I went to was like $1,000 a year. So it was not that onerous a thing. Well, that's no longer the case now. Tuition is a lot higher than that. It is mathematically impossible to get a summer job at minimum wage and earn enough to pay for tuition and books and living costs and so on. So unless your parents are paying for everything, or a significant portion of it, or you're getting full scholarships, full rides, you are most likely getting a student loan in order to go to school, which means when you graduate, you are graduating with debt. You are graduating in the hole, which was not the case for my generation and certainly wasn't the case for baby boomers before me. So you're starting off in the hole. You've got this debt that you've got to pay back. So anything that goes wrong, you've got a big problem. And it's very common when you get a job that you don't get a really high-paying job right out of school. Something goes wrong. I lose my job. I've got to move. I have a medical issue, whatever it is. Well, now I got to use other debt to survive. So millennials then start using credit cards high interest loans, they get behind on their taxes. So it's a combination of all of those things that did not affect previous generations to anywhere near the same extent.
A very fragile balancing act, a lot of precarious situations that can pop up for somebody. Douglas, you mentioned those high interest loans. Someone does not need to walk far down any city block to find a lot of these payday lenders, but I'm sure it goes a little bit beyond that when you talk about those high interest loans or rapid high cost loans. How have those factored into this picture for a lot of millennials who are struggling with debt, or people in general struggling with debt?
Yes, it's a significant issue. And 10 years ago, we called them payday loans because you'd borrow $500 and you'd pay it back next payday. But now the payday lenders have gotten into what we now call rapid loans because they're pretty easy to get, but they are high interest installment loans. So you might be borrowing $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. And the interest rate, I quite commonly see interest rates of 45%. They can be as high as almost 60%. So that's a massive, massive number. Over half of all of our insolvent debtors, half of our clients, and I'm not just talking about millennials, I'm talking about every age group, have these rapid loans where they are paying a significant amount of interest. And in fact, of our clients who have these loans, the average person who has them has 4 of them. So it's not just one.
Wow.
I get a payday loan, I need to get another loan to pay it back, and now I'm in the cycle, and I end up getting into a huge amount of debt. So it's a massive problem because the interest rates are so high. The loans aren't that big. They certainly aren't as big as a car loan or a mortgage or a line of credit. But because the interest rate is so high, it puts a huge dent in your monthly cash flow.
I know you're pulling this data in real time from 2022, and I would forgive me for even asking you a speculative question, but certainly interest rates have exploded in the last year or so. What are you noticing on the ground in the way that you're working with clients right now in regards to the current impact of interest rates?
Yeah, it's very significant. Now, obviously, if we're talking about a payday loan in Ontario, they can charge $15 on every 100 borrowed. So if you're borrowing for 2 weeks, paying it back, paying it back, you would pay $15 on every 100 26 times. That's like 390% interest. So the fact that interest rates have gone up quite a bit, well, it doesn't affect a 390% interest rate loan. And if you're carrying high interest debt, credit card debt, that sort of thing, well, those interest rates were already really high. But if you had a line of credit, the interest rate is definitely higher. If you had a mortgage, or someone has a mortgage and it's a variable rate interest rate mortgage, that's way more expensive now than it was last year. I talked to lots of people who say, yeah, my mortgage payment has gone up by $1,000 a month since last year. That's a very common thing if they're on a variable rate mortgage, particularly if it's an interest-only variable rate type mortgage or a HELOC. Mm-hmm. And if you have any kind of loan that is variable, you're paying a lot more. So you're right. Since the end of the year, so January, February, March into April of this year, our phone has been ringing off the hook a lot more. I predict that this year in 2023, the number of people filing personal insolvency, so bankruptcies and consumer proposals, will probably be 30% higher than it was last year. And a lot of that has to do with higher interest rates. And I think we're probably also moving into a recession. So we're still lower than the number of people who were filing in 2019 before the pandemic, but we are rapidly catching up to that. So it's absolutely having a significant impact.
Douglas, I know you're busy, so just one more question for you here. You mentioned that you're seeing clients from all demographics struggling with debt right now. What is some advice that you might offer to help somebody as they try to mitigate their current financial situation?
Well, debt doesn't normally go away on its own. Compound interest just makes things worse and worse. So what I recommend everyone do is take stock, make a list of everybody you owe money to. What's the interest rate? What's the minimum payment? How much money do I have coming in each month? Can I service it myself? Can I get a part-time job? Can I cut my expenses? Is there anything I can do to make it work? If there is, fantastic. That's what you should do. But if you have an overwhelming amount of debt and there's no way you can pay it back on your own given your current circumstances, then I recommend you reach out to a professional. A licensed insolvency trustee is the only professional in Canada licensed to do a consumer proposal, where we go to the people you owe money to, we make a deal. In most cases, we can get a deal done where you're paying back less than the full amount owed with no interest, and that's the way to get a fresh start. So debt problems don't go away on their own. If you're burdened by too much debt, reach out for help.
Douglas, thank you for this. Thank you for offering some perspective on this study, and thank you to the work that you and your colleagues do.
Thanks, Dave.
That's Douglas Hoyce, a licensed insolvency trustee and the co-founder of Hoyce, Mikolos and Associates. The 2022 Joe Debtor study can be found online at hoyes.com. So that's HOYES.com. HOYES.com, Hoyce.com. Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI-TV or download the podcasts wherever you listen. Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI-TV or download the podcasts wherever you listen.